All right, people, good evening. We are back in the New York mood. Um, so a couple developments today. I don't know about you, but I have been periodically checking in with the developments around law enforcement activity as it pertains to coronavirus. I don't know that it's necessarily of much utility for me to be scrupulously monitoring every uptick in the various death tolls, especially considering how incomplete the data is, how difficult it currently is to really assess the true rates of infection versus mortality versus hospitalization, etc. I think constantly parading those figures has diminishing returns, but there is some interesting stuff that you can monitor with respect to how law enforcement is dealing with coronavirus. And one trend that we've seen lately, not surprisingly, is that some of the Orthodox Jewish communities in the New York, New Jersey region are not abiding by the strictures set forth by the secular authorities. Now, it appears to be a minority within that minority, so I would assume that most of the Hasidim and other Orthodox Jews are complying with orders to shelter in place, to not go out except for essential purposes. So I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush. However, there is evidence that some of the initial outbreaks in the region did originate in tightly knit, highly religious Jewish communities, namely New Rochelle, New York. And we saw, and obviously you can't overly generalize as to the nature of those communities, their composition, or whatnot. But there was an incident just today in Lakewood, New Jersey, which is an enclave of Orthodox Jews in Ocean County. Is that Ocean County? Pretty sure. Yeah, Ocean County, New Jersey, where despite being pleaded with and implored for these communities to please stop going out, police in Tom's River had to stop a school bus full of children today who were out, and the police are saying that this school for Orthodox Jewish children is still quote unquote open despite the statewide mandatory shutdown. And the governor and the head of the New Jersey State Police have made it clear that they are, in fact, going to be using criminal law to enforce compliance with the emergency order. And sure enough, they've done it. Overnight, it was announced today by the commandant or the colonel of the New Jersey State Police. By the way, I mean, I realize that police use military terms to self describe, but it seems a little ridiculous for the head of the New Jersey State Police to be called a colonel. But whatever. His name is Pat Callahan. and he announced today that there was yet another large gathering in Lakewood, New Jersey, last night, and it was a bat mitzvah, which apparently, you can't postpone a bat mitzvah. That's the most pressing, urgent matter right now to make sure it proceeds as normal. I mean, who could ever even dream of postponing a bat mitzvah? And the people who hosted this gathering were arrested and charged with child neglect and for violating the governor's emergency order. And they've said that the statute that they're going to invoke or to utilize to enforce violations of the governor's emergency order is um, disorderly persons. But according to Callahan, he's saying that these are indictable offenses. Um, so I'm not sure to what extent they'll actually enforce these violations, but the governor, Phil Murphy, seemed rather adamant he wanted to use the fullest extent of the law to mandate compliance. And as I've mentioned before, I live in Jersey City, so keeping a special eye on coronavirus offenses in the state. And what we're getting now is basically a daily blotter of people who are being charged with coronavirus related offenses. So let me just read out a couple of them to you. March 26th, again, Lakewood. Police charged William Katzenstein, 39, with a disorderly persons offense for holding a wedding in violation of emergency order. Now, if any of them actually contest these charges, it'll be actually fascinating from a legal standpoint. Because one of the questions that's going to have to be tested is, does the governor of New Jersey actually have the proper statutory authority to impose an emergency order such as this and then charge individuals criminally for violating it? I think there are going to be there could conceivably be some intelligent lawyers who could challenge these charges and maybe even win or appeal them higher up. I mean, I'm assuming you're going to see a variety of such challenges make their way through the legal system, maybe even go up to the Supreme Court eventually. Who knows? But certainly, I think you're going to get the establishment of all manner of interesting and novel case law around some of the law enforcement actions that are stemming from these coronavirus enforcement measures. And there's also the question of like whether some of these charges are pretextual, right? So, March 27th, Piscataway police charged four individuals, all teenagers, you or close to teenagers. Yuhan, age 20. They're Chinese names, so I might mispronounce them, so I'm not going to read them. Um, but these four youngsters were charged with disorderly persons offense violating the emergency orders and criminal mischief for allegedly drag racing and doing donuts in a school parking lot. Now that seems like something that the police would probably arrest you for anyway. So I wonder if the disorderly persons offenses could be contested on the ground that they're pretextual or that they weren't actually the true impetus for whatever investigatory action happened here that led to the charging of these individuals. You have in Hazlitt, New Jersey, state troopers charged somebody. I mean, I'm not even going to read. I shouldn't even read out their names because people are obviously presumed innocent until being proven guilty. But somebody age 30 was charged with obstruction and hindering apprehension or prosecution for allegedly falsely claiming he had the coronavirus in order to avoid charges after being involved in a motor vehicle accident. um, on March on March 25th, again in Lakewood, shocker, somebody was charged with a disorderly persons offense for purposely coughing at a liquor store and claiming he was infected with the coronavirus. March 25th, 51-year-old individual in New Providence arrested on domestic violence charges and stated that he was infected with the coronavirus and started to cough at police and medical personnel. Lakewood, once more, charged a 48-year-old with maintaining a nuisance in violation of the emergency order prohibiting large gatherings for holding a gathering of approximately 25 young men at a school where he's the headmaster. Lots of issues in Lakewood, and there are other charges here that I'm not going to name because I'm getting repetitive. But obviously, it is worth being highly cognizant of how coronavirus is giving law enforcement a whole battery of new tools to enforce criminal violations. And even if there is a public health rationale for some of these measures, it doesn't mean that they can't be exploited or abused. And so I am definitely very wary of to what extent these emergency powers might be entrenching wide-ranging law enforcement surveillance capacities, beyond the remit of what would be required in a rational sense for simply enforcing protocols that are beneficial to public health. So, a lot of this is actually going to be legitimately fascinating if you have interest in the law, which I do, especially sort of like state law, municipal law. I mean, you ever spend some time in like a municipal courtroom, you know how easily local police can kind of just use their so-called discretion to target whomever they would like for trivial offenses. So, yeah, some of this, sorry, some of this needs to be closely monitored, and I don't have the bandwidth to monitor everything happening across the country. This is just one state, albeit New Jersey has one of the highest infection rates. I believe it's second only to New York now. And I'm assuming that given my proximity to New York City, with Jersey City essentially being like the sixth borough, that the concentration of the virus is even greater here. Therefore, I'm sort of operating under the assumption that I'm in the epicenter of the pandemic, which is why I'm not going out unless it's absolutely necessary. And when I do go out, it's with a mask. And that applies even to a leisurely stroll in the park, which I haven't even done recently. Even though there is a relatively nice park right across the street from me, which I do tend to utilize under normal circumstances. But for example, on Saturday, like I ran out of toilet paper. Like I needed to go get toilet paper. It was impossible to order it online. So, I had to actually trek out, and so I went to the local drugstore. Thankfully, they did have toilet paper available, so I was able to successfully make that purchase. However, even though I was wearing a mask, even though I was wearing gloves, I did not feel particularly protected from coronavirus because there was still a fair number of people in there. I was trying to maintain a social distance from everybody, but even like the retail workers, some of them were not wearing protective gear. And again, this is essentially in the epicenter of the pandemic. So when I checked out, what I had to do was like hold up my items to the retail workers like barcode scan, so she didn't have to touch them. All the while trying to maintain a distance. I mean, I've been told about there are some retail locations now where they have plexiglass up and they have like different checkout procedures where you don't have to actually personally interact with anyone anymore. But that wasn't the case at where I went. Um, so given just what I observed in the 10 minutes that I was in there, I have every reason to believe that the prevalence of coronavirus in this region in particular is going to be increasing substantially, notwithstanding some of the containment measures that have been taken. Because the containment measures in Wuhan preliminarily seem to have been effective. Barring wide, large-scale disinformation promulgated by the Chinese government about the situation in Wuhan, which is possible. I'm not denying that that's something to be mindful of. But we do know that they took extreme, you might even say authoritarian measures to enforce that lockdown. I mean, you probably saw the videos of people welding shut the doors of apartment buildings. I mean, stuff really was locked down. Um, and that's just not what's happening right now in New York. It's not even happening to the extent that we've seen in northern Italy. I mean, you guys saw the video that I did with Alessandra a few days ago, who's in Italy. People are, the lockdown in Italy is not as stringent as China, but there are foot patrols, police foot patrols in Italy where if you're out and about and it seems like you're not doing anything in particular, you're going to be checked and you're going to be asked to provide authorization for why you're out walking around. That's not happening in, at least from my vantage point, where I'm looking at my window and I'm seeing people casually strolling around still. Not always maintaining social distance. Thankfully, the playground and stuff across the street from me is less populated than before, and I realize I'm just telling you the view from my window, which might not be representative, but still, it's a little bit troubling and doesn't seem like a particularly good omen. And yeah, I know I coughed there, but you know what? I always cough occasionally, with or without coronavirus, so I'm not going to overinterpret any one cough. And if I do get coronavirus, then you know what? Maybe I'll live stream my intubation, and that'll be it. That'll be curtains for your good friend MT. But maybe I'll get some extra YouTube views out of it and some super chats. Okay, I'm going to actually check now my super chats. Or actually, no, one more point. I'm doubtful that these containment measures that are underway now are going to be effective on a national scale if there's no unified policy across the country. Yeah, there are different infection rates in different places, but the point is you have to stymie the spread of the virus everywhere because, for example, if you have New York City effectively locked down when people are sheltering in place, uh, and let's say in a month the virus does abate to some extent, or abate to some extent. Um, okay, but then what if some of the places where the enforcement measures are more lax, like Mississippi or something, what if we then get an outbreak there? We're going to continue having this patchwork of containment measures And there's no way to fully stop interstate travel in the U.S. legally, socially. I mean, I guess conceivably there is a way to do it, but like you need to have the military in there to shut things down. That's just never happened since the Civil War. Um, so at least given all recent recognizable precedent, it's not as though you can physically prevent all people from Mississippi from coming to New York or vice versa. So that's why it just seems a little fruitless to not to be having these scattershot containment policies without a unified approach. Because it just means that we're probably gonna, we're gonna end up in the same place that we're in with New York City, someplace else down the line. Remember, we don't even know for sure that like the infection rates in New York City are necessarily much lower than or much higher than anywhere else. It's just there's a greater rate of testing, and there's a higher density. Um, yeah. So anyway, that's just leading me to kind of prepare to be in this lockdown, self quarantine situation for an extended period of time. Super chats. Somebody asks, "Have you ever taken the political compass test?" I'm sure I took that years ago. I don't know that it's particularly illuminating of anything. Those are always very reductive. Krillin says, "I bought TP on eBay instead of risking it. You're a smart man." All right, not going to go on much further right now. Have a good night, everybody. See ya.